Nice. Happy Halloween. I wanted to make a short video about some of my favorite hip-hop albums for Halloween because hip-hop and horror are literally my two favorite things. I make a lot of playlists, and one of my first playlists that I ever made was simply just called Halloween. It's not just filled with horrorcore, although admittedly a majority of it is, obviously. That's just because horrorcore is also one of my favorite subgenres in hip-hop. But there is also a bunch of other songs in there that I feel like just match the vibe of Halloween. I do think there is a distinction between a song or album that can match the vibe of Halloween versus just pure horrorcore. Halloween has a kind of whimsical, supernatural, and heavy storytelling element to it that is a little bit different from songs that are just filled with pure gore, violence, and blood. So without further ado, here are my top picks of albums and singles that I like to listen to during Halloween that I think are perfect. This also is not a ranking, by the way. The first album that comes to mind is Big L's Lifestyles of the Poor and Dangerous. So Big L is a great example of impeccable storytelling. His albums masterfully paint a graphic and raw, unfiltered image of East Coast street life. While the beats on this album aren't exactly horrific with terrifying synths, Big L's menacing lyrics and powerful punchlines with vivid descriptions of murder and violence make up for it. Personally, I believe he's one of the best rappers that can describe murder and violence beautifully. My favorite songs from the album that I think are quintessential for Halloween is Danger Zone and The Graveyard. Number 2 is Memphis Rap. It would be literally disrespectful to not mention Memphis Rap if we're talking about anything horror related in hip-hop. I'm from Iraq and I am literally terrified of the idea of visiting Memphis just because of how well these artists and albums have visualized and captured the dangerous essence of the city. Well, I'm not sure if it's still dangerous, to be honest. Well, I'm not from America, so I can't tell, but I mean, is it different? Is it different from what it was before? Is it still pretty violent? I don't know. If someone from Memphis is watching this, please let me know. Nonetheless, I love Memphis Rap and I grew up listening to it. Some of my favorite albums are not even available on Apple Music. You have to listen to them on YouTube as cassette rips, which I feel only really adds on to the horror aspect. The gritty, staticky, and distorted sounds make it sound like as if you discovered these cassettes in like a haunted crypt. Honestly, you could also just listen to Memphis Rap throughout all of Halloween and that would suffice. But anyways, here are 3 of my favorites that I think are perfect for Halloween. One is Mystic Styles by 3 6 Mafia. This is a classic. I think everyone should listen to this album even if you're not interested in horror or Memphis rap. 2 is Ashes to Ashes, Dust to Dust by Tommy Wright III. The third is The Devil's Playground by KOOPSTA, which I think is a quintessential Memphis rap album that everyone should listen to. The next album is the Geto Boys, Till Death Do Us Part. To be honest, many of the Geto Boys albums work great for Halloween. I specifically just chose Till Death Do Us Part. However, the Resurrection is also a really good album. This album is packed with graphic storytelling alongside a chaotic, bustling sound. What really sets the Geto Boys apart is that their lyrics are often sorrowful, reflecting the harsh realities that they faced. Themes like racism, police brutality, and poverty intertwine with violence, making this album hauntingly relevant. My favorite songs in particular are I Just Wanna Die, Still, Open-Minded, The World is a Ghetto, and The Blind Leading the Blind. Fourth album is Viktor Vaughn's Vaudeville Villain. Of course, I had to add a album from our well-loved villain, Mr. MF Doom. MF Doom is one of the most multifaceted rappers, using multiple personas to give us different perspectives to his rhymes and stories. And this is another instance where not everything Halloween related needs to be super explicit or about violence and murder. Sometimes you just need a clever and slick villain to cheer for. Vaudeville Villain is all about Viktor Vaughn, a younger version of Doom's character. In comparison to some of other Doom's albums, sonically this album is more dark and eerie and gritty and makes use of really good horror movie samples and sci-fi-esque sounds. My favorite tracks are Modern Day Mugging, Never Dead, Open Mic Night Part 2, and Lactose Lecithin. I also think King Ghidorah albums could work well for Halloween because he is that big like 3-headed alien reptilian thing. The next is 2 albums from the same artist, Brotha Lynch Hung's Season of the Sickness and Loaded. So this is not surprising. Brotha Lynch Hung is actually one of my favorite artists and he is quintessential horrorcore. Season of the Sickness is his most critically acclaimed album that a lot of people gear towards, which is why I mentioned it in this video. However, I would also say that Loaded is probably almost just as well best fitting for Halloween, if not even better than Season of Sickness. I also just really like that album. Both albums, and especially Loaded, sound like West Coast horror movie soundtracks. Brotha Lynch Hung expertly uses horror vocal styling with tense atmospheric beats to make really chilling albums. Some of my favorite songs to check out from the album is Rest in Piss, Liquor Sick, Deep Down, Welcome to Your Own Death, One of the Last Sick, and bonus tracks. I think this is number 6, Tyler the Creator's Goblin. I feel like I had to add a more mainstream and somewhat more relevant album, although this came out like maybe 10-ish plus years ago. Goblin is a chaotic and grotesque album that is perfect for Halloween. Old Tyler was rude, raw, unapologetically wild, and a lot of fun to listen to. I really do miss like the Odd Future Golf Wing era. It was just so like diabolically fun. Yeah, it reminds me a lot of my early high school years. My favorite songs from this album that I feel like fit the vibe of Halloween perfectly is obviously Goblin and Yonkers, Radicals, Nightmares, and Sandwiches. And as an extra, I would add in Martians vs. Goblins from the game's RED album. Number 7 is Lord Infamous, Lord of Terror. I already mentioned Memphis rap before, but I feel like Lord Infamous, aka the Scarecrow, deserves his own spot. The lyrics to this album are extremely graphic and violent and murderous, and I think what makes it even more scary is just how serious his tone is. This is another one that you'll have to look up on YouTube, but again, the grittiness and the lo-fi quality of it just makes it sound even more eerie. I was listening to it while I was doing the write-up to this video, and honestly, it is so diabolically hypnotic. Just from the title of the songs I'm about to mention, you can kind of already catch the vibe of what this album is gonna sound like, but my favorite songs are 9mm, Murder on the Menu, Dragon from the River, and Scarecrow. This next album should come as no surprise whatsoever, but it is the Gravediggaz 6 Feet Deep. This album is a classic and the perfect example of fun, supernatural horror storytelling. Anyone who's familiar with RZA's production style knows that he's heavily inspired by films, so not only does this album have that classic Wu-Tang sound, but there's also a lot of sonic horror elements as well. I would also say that this album is kind of like a conceptual horror album. Each member has their own horror persona, so for example, the Grim Reaper and the Gatekeeper, and their mission was to resurrect the mentally dead. Specifically, my favorite songs on this album is Diary of a Madman, which I heavily recommend listening to because it's just so much fun, 1-800-Suicide, Bang Your Head, and Constant Elevation, which reminds me a lot of the Addams Family. My next pick is Denzel Curry's Taboo. Denzel Curry is one of my favorite current rappers, and his approach to Taboo was really interesting. As you listen to it, the lyrics and sound get more darker and chaotic. I feel like this descent into chaos is just perfect for Halloween. Not only does the sound get darker as you listen through it, but the themes from disc 1 to 3 get more heavy and serious, touching upon things like abuse and suicide. There's also a lot of experimentation and distortion in the album, making it sound like pure sonic violence. Some of my favorite tracks on this album is Sumo and Mad I Got It, and literally every single track on disc 3, especially Vengeance. The last pick is from a pioneer in horrorcore, Esham's KKKILL the Fetus. This is another instance where you can literally listen to Esham through all of Halloween and it would still suffice. Nonetheless, Esham's KKKILL the Fetus is an extremely graphic, extremely violent album that explores many murderous and gory themes. One thing that differentiates this album in comparison to the other ones is that there's also this inclusion of religion in the lyrics. However, it's framed in a very sinister way, the same way that horror movies frame religion. It touches upon themes of mental illness and paranoia, and I feel like it sounds like there's also really schizophrenic parts in it. In my personal opinion, I feel like this album captures the mind of a serial killer, or if a serial killer was to make a hip-hop album, I think this is what it would sound like. Finally, I have some singles that I love for Halloween that I always play during this time. The first being one of my favorite old school songs from one of my favorite old school groups ever, WHODINI's Haunted House of Rock. This song is, to me, honestly, very ahead of its time. There's a lot of like techno horror synths in it, and it's just a lot of fun. I feel like this is like the perfect example of like a fun Halloween hip-hop song to listen to. I remember one time I was watching a 80s horror movie and I actually heard this song playing in the background, which kind of shocked me because usually 80s horror movies, like teen 80s horror movies, would usually use like rock music versus rap. I guess that was just a big testament to how big Whodini was at the time. And finally, my personal top favorite song for Halloween is Natural Born Killaz by DR.DRE and Ice Cube. The beat to this song is absolutely insane. From the second you hit play, you're hit with this screeching, like high intensity synth, obviously because, you know, there's that West Coast style production to it from Dre, but there's also countless gunshots throughout the song that just make you feel on edge. The lyrics are clever, witty, and catchy. It's filled with horror references from movies and real life. Dre and Cube sound like literally psychotic throughout the whole song, and as the song continues, you can just see them spiral even deeper into rage and anger. One of my favorite facts about this song is that it was the first collaboration between Dre and Cube after the huge NWA split. The music video for it is also a lot of fun. I love the flashing lights on their faces. You also get to see Tupac at the end. So those are my top picks. If you have any recommendations, please let me know in the comments. I would love to listen. Otherwise, thanks for watching and I hope you have an amazing Halloween.